Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning for you guys over there. Thank you for joining us today in this free webinar about how to move in Portugal. I'm Rossana, I'm going to be your host today, and I'm the Business Development Director of Global International Relocation. This is a company that specializes in helping expats move to Portugal, and we help you with everything that you need from, the immigration process, finding a house, finding school for your kids, moving your belongings, anything that you might need. And we decided to start presenting these webinars because we've seen an increase of people very interested in moving to Portugal. And they've been asking for a lot of information in terms of the visa. And I think it's important to have some of the information very clear. So here we are. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to give a presentation. I'm not going to be able to answer questions throughout the presentation, but at the end, which will be in about 35 minutes, you can ask questions in that chat box that you can see down there, somewhere around here. So make sure you drop your questions there. And after the webinar, I'm going to address them all. Having said that, let's get started. Oh, by the way, after the webinar is done, we're going to be giving a 15-minute consult to anyone who's interested in knowing more information if they want us to assess their specific situation. So make sure you drop us a line at Portugal@globalpt or Portugal@globalpt, and we'll get back to you and we can schedule one of the sessions. All right, I'm going to share my screen to get the webinar started. And so here we are. So today we're going to be talking about two main types of visas or visa schemes to come to Portugal, which are the more used today that are not actually working visas. One is the D7 and another one is the golden visa for investment. We're going to be touching base with those two today. We're going to be talking about the tax frame in Portugal and the kind of benefits an expat moving to Portugal under these type of two visas can have. And then we're going to touch briefly some information about where to live or where to invest if you wanted to buy or purchase a house in Portugal, whether it's worth it renting or not. So we're going to talk about that as well. Let's get started with the D7 visa. The D7 visa was a visa type that was initially thought out to be for people who wanted to retire in Portugal. So anyone who wanted to come here and live out of their retirement income, their investments, anything like that, they could ask for the D7 visa and they could move to Portugal. Then 2020 happened, the pandemic hit, and the world we live in changed, which means that a lot of people now are allowed to work remotely for companies, and also a lot of people who's freelancers, what we call digital nomads. So they started applying for this type of visa and it works just as well. Only limitation of the D7 is that you cannot come to work for a Portuguese company with a work contract under the D7 visa. It has to be income from abroad. So it's very important that we keep this in mind throughout the webinar. So yeah, this applies for anyone with this freelancer, digital nomads, families that are living out of passive income from investments, and also retirement. To qualify for the D7 visa, you need to have, or you need to keep in mind that there are two major points. The first one is that you need to prove that you have enough income to sustain yourself for a year when you're applying for the visa, and that you have steady income coming in to sustain yourself for the future as well. And at the moment, the way that you can prove that is to opening a bank account here in Portugal, which is something that you can do remotely while living in the US or in your origin country. And there are agencies that can help you. We can help you with that as well. And then you have to transfer funds in there that you can show when you're doing the application for the visa. And to give you an example of the total amount that you have to have in that bank account, is you have to take into account the minimum wage in Portugal, which is about 665 euros per month. And that times 12 end up being a little bit shy of 8,000 euros. So if you're coming by yourself, you need to open a bank account in Portugal and you need to transfer 8,000 euros to that bank account, have proof of that to be shown at the interview in the consulate. If you're coming with, your wife or your husband, then you need to have that plus 50% additionally for that person, which means around 12K total. And then if you have children, then each children represents 30% of that income. So it has to be a total between 15,000 to 30,000 to 20,000 for a family of 3 or 4 people that you need to have in that bank account. And that's the basic thing, the mandatory thing you need to show when you're going to do the visa application. However, we recommend always to have additional proof of income. So if you have a steady job, you have a steady income every month, you can show your payroll that you have for the last 6 months, or you can show your bank statements from your origin country. If you have investments, show some of those investments, anything else that can actually back up that that amount that you have in the bank. The more you can show, the easier it will be for the authorities to approve the visa. The second thing is you need to have a clean background, FBI background. You cannot have anything on your criminal record. And then you need to have the intention to move to Portugal for 6 months plus 1 day out of the year. So you have to become a tax resident in Portugal to be able to grant the visa. The benefits of this visa is that you have all the benefits of someone who already lives in Portugal, a Portuguese citizen or an already resident in Portugal. You will have access to move freely across the EU. You will have access to the national healthcare system in Portugal, which is for free or almost for free, and you'll be able to use it. And you will be eligible as well to become a permanent resident after living here for 5 years legally, or you will also have the opportunity to become a Portuguese national and getting nationality after 5 years living here, which will grant you an European passport. And aside from that, you get the tax benefits we're going to talk about a little bit more into this webinar. One of the big questions that we have about the healthcare system, which is something that's very attractive, is whether you can have free access to anything. We always recommend to buy a private insurance when you're here in Portugal for checkups and appointments with doctors. But anything urgent, if you need to have a surgery or a treatment for a disease or anything like that, then the public healthcare system, it's a really great option. And if you go the route of private insurance, buying a local private insurance per person doesn't cost you more than 50 to 60 euros per month, even less than that. So I think it's a very attractive way. Then the documents that you need, among the documents, because it changes from consulate to consulate, but generally they will ask for the ones in the list here. Passport, pictures, declarations that we will provide. The bank account in Portugal, again, this is something that it's a bit of a weird requirement, but it became a mandatory requirement in the last few months, and so it needs to be done remotely if you're not able to travel to Portugal before applying for the visa. Normally what we do is that we do the pre-opening of the bank account. The bank will send you the forms, you sign them and you send them back to Portugal. And then in a few days you have the bank account open. Then the health insurance. To apply for the visa, you need to prove that you have a temporary health insurance and that you have travel insurance. We recommend purchasing an international insurance for about 6 months. And once you have your residency here, you can just cancel that insurance and get local insurance, or just stay with the national healthcare system. And then evidence of having accommodation in Portugal for at least 6 months. And this is another requirement that's a bit weird, but it's actually how they prove your intent to live here for more than 83 days a year. So what we recommend is you can either do an Airbnb reservation for 6 months that has flexible cancellation policies. And with that, you submit that into the consulate, and that should be good. Or if you have friends here, they can issue a letter saying that you will be living with them. Those 2 forms are okay. What are the time frames? So this is a process that it's a 2-phase process. The first phase is done in your origin country in the US, and at the consulate, Portuguese consulate in the origin country. We gather all the documents. Normally you have a lawyer that will assist you throughout the whole process, review documentation, liaise with the consulate, make sure they have all the appointments. Once we have all the documents, then you will submit that to the consulate, and it will take about 60 to 90 days for them to issue the visa. We're getting at the moment answers from the US consulates between 30 to 60 days. Before it was a bit longer because of the pandemic, but now timelines are being shorter. And then once you get the visa issued, it'll be a visa that will last you for 120 days, and you have to enter Portugal within those 120 days. And once you enter in Portugal, then phase 2 of the process starts, which is after you get the stamp on your passport that you enter, we need to book you an appointment with the immigration office. And that appointment won't be immediately. It will take maybe a month or 2 to actually happen. But after that appointment happens, you'll get your residence card. And for that appointment, our lawyer will accompany you personally to get everything. One thing you need to keep in mind is that once you have that appointment for the residence permit, you do need to have permanent housing in Portugal, like have a real proper rental contract or having purchased a home or something like that. And once you have that interview, within 2 to 3 weeks, you receive that card in your house. Then we have another type of visa, apart from the D7, which is the golden visa. And this golden visa is more for someone who wants to invest a big amount of money in Portugal, and they don't really want to live here for most part of the year. So if you have interest in investing on real estate or in establishing a local business or invest in funds, then this is the right type visa for you, because you only need to be here 7 days a year in order to maintain residency. And the good thing about this is that you can actually have the same benefits that with the D7, like becoming a permanent resident and also getting nationality and having the healthcare system also. So the thing about the golden visa is that in 2022, it's going to change. So up until December this year, you could invest into buying property in the main cities, Lisbon, Porto, or in the coastline. And if you had the right amount invested, you will be eligible for the visa. But what's happening now is that the government wants to push investment into the more interior and rural areas of the country, so that it's going to stop allowing people to invest in the main cities and in the coastline in order to grant this residence permit, and it will only happen for more remote areas. But even that, Portugal is very small. There will be areas that are closer to the big cities and to the coastline that you can do that investment and get away with it and get the visa. Another changes that are going to happen is that normally these investments need to be between 350,000 euros to 500,000 euros. So it's not a small amount of money. It has to be a really good amount of money. And then transfer of capital, if you want to go that route, will increase to 500K. And transfer of capital for other areas like research or company formation will also increase to 500K. Before it was 350K. And if instead of buying a house or investing, in capital funds or in a company, you want to just have money sitting in the bank, it has to be a minimum of $1.5 million before, or euros. Before that, it was 1 million. Now when we spoke about the visas, and like I said, I know you might have a lot of questions, just make sure you drop me a line, portugal@global.pt, and I will answer all your questions. But now let's go and talk a little bit about the tax frame in Portugal. So one of the first documents that we need to obtain, and this happens at the beginning of the process before you even decided to apply for the visa, is to get your tax number in Portugal. And you will need this number to open the bank account. So it's really important that that's the first thing that we get. That initial tax number will be as a non-resident, and then you will have, it will be associated to your address in the US or in your origin country, and then you will have to have a fiscal representative here in Portugal. Normally we do that representation, so that's not an issue. But just so you know, that initial tax number is as a non-resident one. I'm not going to talk about documents that you need. They're in the presentation, but I can explain further if you want on that 15-minute call. Once you are already here in Portugal, you have your residence permit, you have permanent housing, then you have to become a tax resident in Portugal. And that means that you need to change in that document, the tax number, your address from the US, and give an address in Portugal. Once your address is based in Portugal, you're considered a tax resident. And obviously you have to spend more than 183 days here to be considered a tax resident. Just so you understand a little bit about the frame, the Portuguese and European tax system, it's based on the residence criteria. So if where you base your main residency is, that's where you're being taxed. And revenues are taxed in Portugal, whether obtained in Portugal or whether obtained abroad. The tax system in Portugal is a progressive tax system. So depending how much you earn net gross throughout the year, that's how much you get taxed. And for example, if your net income is 7,000 a year, then your rate is minimum 14%. And if you have income above 250,000, it'll be 48% plus 5%, so that's about 53%. However, and the reason I wanted you to understand this is that if you decide to come here under any of the schemes visa we spoke, you might be eligible for a NHR, which is a non-habitual resident tax in Portugal. And this is a benefit. It was a special tax regime that was conceived to attract foreign investment in Portugal, and it's a very attractive for foreigners who are thinking about coming to Portugal. You can benefit from this NHR if you haven't been a tax resident in Portugal in the last 5 years, and then you become a tax resident. So I believe most of you will qualify. This benefit will be you will be eligible for this benefit for the next 10 years after you're granted the NHR. And that means that any income that you generate from abroad is not taxed, and any income you generate in Portugal will have a tax cap rate of 20%. And this applies for very specific profiles, but it's a very wide list. So most people actually qualify for this, but we can look each case independently and we'll see. So the NHR must be requested to the tax authorities once you become a tax resident in Portugal. And like I said before, you get a 20% tax rate if you get professional income, and any dividends, capital gains, or interest obtained in Portugal has a cap rate of 28%. But if you obtain those abroad, then it can be exempt from tax in Portugal. You still are required to declare taxes, but you won't be having to pay any taxes. After the 10 years have passed, important to know that then the progressive rates I spoke before will apply. And now that we went through, I know that the tax information in Portugal, it has a lot more, it's more deep than the one I'm speaking here, and each person has their own specific frame that they want to frame here in Portugal. So if you want a consult with one of our tax lawyers, just let us know and we can just check that for you. Where to live. This is information. We can do another webinar about this, where to live, whether to invest or rent. I mean, there's a lot of information because there's a lot of things happening in Portugal at the moment, but I wanted to touch base about 3 main areas where a lot of people, it's actually investing or coming to live, so you understand the reasons and the benefits. And obviously the first place is the 2 main cities, which is Lisbon and Porto, and the benefits are clear. You know, it's the big cities, everything's happening culturally speaking. There's a lot of diversity, and you have most people speak English, so you don't really have to learn the language, although it's very well recommended. It has public transport that can connect you everywhere. It's closer to other cities where you have the coastline, so you're allowed to go to the beach, you know, in a 15-minute car ride or a 20-minute train ride. So it has a lot of benefits, but obviously because it's the most famous areas in terms of real estate, it's are the most expensive. So to give you an example, if you wanted to move to Porto in downtown and buy an apartment there, you will need to have between, for a 2-bedroom furnished, you will need to have between 800 euros to 15 to 2,000. It can be obviously more expensive than that, but that's an average. But if you wanted to buy that same apartment in downtown Porto, then you need to consider a budget above 300,000 euros, and it can go up to 1 million, 2 million, obviously depending on what you're looking for. But for less than 300,000 euros, you don't find a really good 2-bedroom apartment in those areas. If you wanted to do the same thing in Porto, but more towards the outskirts where the coastline is, it's still about the same because there are very popular areas at the moment. It's very well connected to the main city, but it's also more of a beach destination. So this example here, it's a rental of a one-bedroom apartment that is being furnished that overlooks the sea, and it's listed for around €1,000. If you wanted to buy that same apartment, then probably for 250,000 you could find it, but then you still find more expensive properties. If you wanted to do the same thing in Lisbon, this is an example of a property in downtown Lisbon, in one of the most expat-friendly areas. And this is an 80 square meter, 2-bedroom apartment, and it's listed for 1,100 a month. I have to be honest, right now the market's a bit going crazy, so prices are up. And maybe the same apartment now could be somewhere between the 1,500, and that's an average price that you can find for rentals in downtown Lisbon. But if you wanted to buy that same apartment, it won't be less than 500,000 euros, for example. If you wanted to live more towards the coastline in the Lisbon area, rentals are about the same. Price in Lisbon between 1,100 to 2,000, even more than that, but less than that, you're not so close to the coastline. And if you wanted to buy that same apartment, then you can find places from 350K up into $1 million. Another area is down south of Portugal, the Algarve. And the Algarve, it's one of the most searched for areas by expats because it has the best weather of Portugal. It's all the way in the coastline, and I'll show you the map in a minute. Properties aren't as expensive as they are in Lisbon and Porto, even though they're increasing in price at the moment. And the whole feeling of the place is a very vacation-like, very relaxed type of life. And only that, but there are huge community of people from the US or people from the UK, of people from France, and a lot of countries, including obviously Portuguese people, but it's a very international environment for people who likes that. And you can find there, even the New York Times, they will sell in the shop next to your house or something like that. So it's a very international. The Algarve, it's like a major coastline that it's around 150, 200 kilometers, and there are small towns all around it. And you can either choose to live in a very lively town where a lot of things are happening very close to the sea, or you can choose to live in a more remote area and buy a house with a lot more space and with a huge area for, having a garden or anything that you like. So you have those two types of lives in there. And to give you an example, if you wanted to rent an apartment in one of those lively towns close to the beach, you can find, 2-bedroom for about 900 or 950 euros. So the one in the left is an apartment in the lively town. And then the one in the right is a house, a 3-bedroom house in a more remote area with a pool for the same price. And that's how much they differ. Obviously, the one to the right is very far away from the center of the city. If you wanted to buy properties in this area in the Algarve, then you can find properties from 150K, an apartment, 1 or 2 bedrooms for holidays, up until 500,000 or more houses in more secluded areas. But there's a huge offer of opportunities there for investment. This other examples in the Algarve. This is, for example, an apartment, a 3-bedroom for sale in one of the towns for 300,000 euros in a modern building. But then for maybe 100,000 more, you can find a really big house with a massive area for forest area that you can live in. And the third place I wanted to touch base with you, it's the Silver Coast, which is an area that we love to recommend because it's not so exploded like other cities are. And it has a very good feeling of living close to the sea. And actually you get an access to the more Portuguese culture because a lot of locals live there. Housing is less expensive. And so you have an idea. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a minute. And I'm going to show you the map. I'm going to share it back again with the map so I can show you a little bit of the places that we spoke about. Just a minute. Okay, here we are. So if you can see here, map of Portugal. Here's Lisbon, capital of Portugal. And then here's Porto, the north of Portugal, which we spoke about. This is the Algarve. the little coastline area that we were talking about that's very famous among, especially because if you drive all the way here, you can go to the south of Spain all the way to the Mediterranean. But yeah, those are the towns. And then the Silver Coast that we love to talk about here, it's this area right here that's between Lisbon and Porto, all this coastline right here. And it's an amazing place because you get access within an hour and a half by car to Lisbon, and within an hour and a half by car to Porto, maybe a little bit more, 2 hours. They have connection with trains and everything else. So it's a really good way to live in the middle of it all without being in it. So yeah, that's the area we spoke about. I'm gonna share back the presentation so we can speak a little bit more about the Silver Coast and show you some examples. Well, like I said, the benefits is that you're so close to the city that you can actually drive there in less than an hour. And there's also a lot of surf for someone who likes that sport, which is very big in Portugal. We have the biggest wave in Nazaré in November. So it's like a very famous place to go to. And it's just an interesting information in there. An example of a property in Nazaré or in any of those towns is you can find rentals between 500 up to 1,000 euros in any of those towns, and you can buy properties for sale for a lot less than in the big cities, or for 100,000 up to also 300,000. You can find a really good apartment, like a modern one, very close to the sea. But if you're interested in knowing more about the opportunities for investment, just let me know and I can share with you some of the information. This is it. We are at the end of our webinar. And if, like I said, if you have any questions, if you want us to book a 15-minute meeting for free with one of our lawyers, drop me an email to portugal@global.pt and I will be happy to get back to you and schedule a meeting. We're here to help you. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and hopefully we'll hear from you very soon. Have a great night.